Hi students, welcome to the presentation on multiple intelligences and Howard Gardner's theory. I'm actually going to talk a little bit more about how the further reaching implications of this theory plays into what we do in preschool. So one of the ideas that I think about is testing in school. So right off the bat, we are testing for knowledge and we are teaching for knowledge. So we teach and teach and teach by giving the facts, drilling the children, and then testing them to make sure that they've got the information and they can regurgitate it. It does little to engage them or to motivate them or to really connect with them in a meaningful or a interesting way. So the other idea, what we call that is the rote learning, which is short term, and also the drill and kill. And then naming facts does nothing for really learning. If you're learning just the facts, it does nothing to adhere. There's nothing to adhere to. So there's no real connection to what you're learning. And that is more of a teacher centered approach and a didactic approach. The other concept here is the child loses their interest and they're not motivated to learn. The didactic approach is very unfair because it treats everyone the same. If you're studying math, for example, or if you're a math teacher, let's say, and you're teaching math to two different students, one is more mathematically inclined and has that strength, then you're more likely to turn to that child who is able to regurgitate those answers for you because it also provides affirmation for what you're teaching. And so it does little to support the child who doesn't understand the concepts and who is struggling. So that's not engaging everyone. That's really just teaching to one style. So another approach would be, or the child-centered approach would be one that is active learning. And active learning is generally defined as any instructional method that engages students in the learning process. In short, active learning requires students to do meaningful learning activities and think about what they're doing. If everyone had the same kind of mind and intelligence, then testing for facts would make sense. But we could teach everybody the same thing in the same way, but then we're just robots. So let's not be robots. So Howard Gardner came up with the theory of multiple intelligences, and the way that he explains it, in actually much better way terms that I could do, but the way that he says is that everybody has many strengths in many of these areas, but some are stronger than others, and we can use those strengths that we have to become more well-rounded and support us in the other areas where we are still not as adept or able to articulate in a certain area. So, for example, if you were more musical and loved rhythm and harmony, etc., but you were needing to learn something in natural science, for example, maybe you could look at rhythms or patterns in nature. For example, roses have patterns of 1, 3, 5, and 7 in their stems, and so you would use that intelligence in music to connect with nature by looking for those patterns. So the 7 intelligences, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 intelligences that are listed here are musical, rhythmic, and harmonic, visual spatial, verbal linguistic, logical mathematical, bodily kinesthetic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and naturalistic. So I'm sorry, that's 8. And when you think about these different types of intelligences, you think about and you connect them with what we're doing in the preschool classroom. I've always been someone who can look at the classroom and say that we are, or we should be, addressing each of these intelligences throughout our classroom. So we set up our learning centers, for example. There's Math Center, there's the Science Center, there's the Music Center, there's the Visual Spatial, Kinesthetic, the art area for like the easel. There's the naturalist if we have a garden or an outdoor classroom. We have each of these areas set up throughout our classroom, but we don't make children stay in, shouldn't make children stay in just one area or do a rotation for that simple purpose, is that some children are going to be more interested in other areas and they're going to look to their strengths. They're going to follow their strengths to learn and explore. So, based on their interest, and they're going to be motivated to learn. So, if you take some of these areas and you integrate them, so let's say you want to address math and you want to address science. So, let's say you have in the science area the water table, and you've put in some different color, and you take counting bears or you put dolphins in there, and at the science, the water, while you're pouring and children are exploring the properties of water, they're now also exploring those mathematical concepts with the support of the educator nearby. So that's one way. So we integrate them. So we don't just, make science and math. We cross them throughout our classroom. The same thing with in our math area, you would bring in sticks and rocks and shells and all different kinds of naturalist materials so that children can explore them and explore them through a mathematical way by manipulating the materials and counting, which they naturally do. So these are just some ideas to think about when you're thinking about setting up your classroom so that you're supporting multiple intelligence in lots of different ways. And then, so by setting up our classrooms to address each of these intelligences, as most preschool classrooms are set up, you can address the different learning styles of learning intelligences of each child. And then it is in the mind to think that children think that children need to take the test to demonstrate. Let me go back. It is a myth to think that children need to take a test to demonstrate their knowledge. And I completely agree with that statement. If we believe that children just should regurgitate facts, then that is what we're going to get back from them. That is the only measurement of their intelligence. But there's lots of different intelligence that we can't necessarily measure. And, maybe the interpersonal, or someone who's very nurturing and loving and gentle and kind and is very good with other people. And you see those children in your classroom who take the hand of another peer and walk them around and help them in the classroom. They care for the younger child. You can't measure that kind of intelligence. So to believe that you could is to say that children are not intelligent, and they are. So moving on, we could talk about, in essence, children can demonstrate their knowledge by engaging in something that they're interested in and working through it, such as architecture in the block area, mathematical in the manipulatives, or kinesthetic painting at the easel. We can teach in many ways. We can provide many tools in our classroom for children to explore, and it doesn't always mean we have to directly teach it to them. The idea is that we use assessment and observation in order to learn these different intelligences of children so that we can spread it throughout our classroom in many different ways. So if we look at the linguistic learner, someone who's very good with reading books or loves to talk, etc., we put up tape recorders, or we put out books in the library, we put out words around our classroom, etc., that children are able to engage with, like little posters of the alphabet, if that's what you see, or words, like a word board. Those are the kinds of approaches that we take. And instead, we should narrow the focus of our topics as well and teach more about the process and not products. When you focus on the process, let's take science, for example. If we think about the topic of science, there's a science of everything, and anything that you can think of has a specific science to it. So instead of trying to focus on those topics that science explores, we should teach to think scientifically. So for example, teaching children how to observe, how to measure, how to experiment or test a hypothesis, how to formulate that hypothesis and test it, and then how to go back to observing it again and going through that process. If you teach them to be scientific in that way, then they're going to explore their world in that way. So we have to tap into that resource about teaching about processes, not about the topic or the end products. And then children should not be drilled or checked for knowledge through a checklist of facts. Instead, we should look at them and assess them in an authentic way that represents who the child really is and where the child is. So assessment should not be done to a child, but instead the child should be an active agent in their own learning. And I believe that doing reflective approaches, such as the project approach, and then reflecting on that project approach and putting it throughout your classroom as you do documentation panels, etc., allowing children to go back to those documentation panels and reflect on that information, is allowing them to be active agents and seeing that process played out. And so we move from that teacher-centered approach to a child-centered approach. And which brings me to the idea of the living curriculum and my final quotes from a book called Back to the Basics of Teaching and Learning and Thinking the World Together, and is written by Hardeen, Clifford, and Friesen. It's one of my favorite books, and I'm reading from page 13, and it says, "We are searching for a school curriculum that acknowledges the importance of the lived experience of children and teachers, that understands growth as more than an interior, private, individual matter of unfolding development, that situates teaching and learning within the context of an educative community, and that asks hard questions about the fuzzy feel-good legacy of much of what teachers do now in the name of progressive practice." So if we think about the living curriculum and what children know, who they are, what they bring to us, and we start there, we can grow these children to be amazing adults by getting them to question the world instead of giving them the question from the world. And that is my presentation. Thank you so much.